Well, hello, welcome to this edition of the About Time podcast. It's me, Chris Nichols. And as you know, this is a series where I get the chance to talk to people I've worked with over the last few years. And I'm absolutely delighted that today it's John Higgins. I know I'm going to ask John to start by saying something about how we met. But first of all, welcome. Welcome, John.
Really looking forward to this. Thank you.
Yeah, and you better answer that question then about where did we meet, or at least where did our paths cross? Because it's a while.
Well, I'm not really sure where we first met. I know that you've been part of my universe for a very long time. The roots go back to when I joined what was then Ashridge Consulting in 1997, which was a big moment in my life where I halved my salary and finally, well, not finally, but really kicked the addiction to money. And I stepped into the Masters in Organisational Consulting as it was then. And that introduced me to a whole world that I had not known till then. Up until then, I'd been a pretty mainstream management consultant, a really bad computer programmer. And suddenly I was introduced to social constructionism. I was introduced to the idea of life as conversation. I was introduced to just broadly the lack of objectivity in the objective world. And how do you do critical subjectivity, which is just, happy lightweight stuff. But
Yeah.
it was my blue or red pill, whatever the cliche is moment.
Now you see, so you joined there before I joined there, so you were definitely part of it. I joined 2000, so yeah, and I was in the college and drifted over to consulting gradually. So there you are. So we have a bit of common heritage in the that Ashridge consulting framing of things and the master's degree. Um, and I guess that's part of what you do now, but it's not all. Well, this is very timely. I'm very conscious that as we speak, you have the front cover, may I say, of the Sloan Management Review. Now, this is like one of the global glossy mags of top end management stuff. So, how come?
I just, I just have no idea. When we, I was on a walk with Megan Rates, who I've worked with for many years, researching truth to power and all that. And it was early 2000, no, 2023. And we were walking down the canal in Berkhamsted, and she turns to me and says, "John, we've got to research into spaciousness." And I turn around to her and say, "What on earth do you mean by that?" And she says, "I don't know, but it's really important." And so we sketched out a rough article, having not done any research, and we sent that over to another leading management journal. And I think on reflection, they quite rightly came back and said, "This sounds a bit woo-woo." But anyway, 2.5 years on, we've done a whole load of research, and we have moved from woo-woo to being mainstream. And there's
Right.
something about um, people, there's something in the waters at the moment where people are conscious that our addiction to busyness is not serving us well. I don't think addiction to anything serves us well, but it is the way that how we engage with reality, with our love of task, with our love of doing, with this desire to treat everything as having a bottom line. And what we're really trying to popularize, and we're surprised to find that there are a huge number of people who are hungry for this. It's like, could we stop treating each other as things, please? Um, could we accept that all the sort of language of everything's got to be smart, strategic, measurable, that sort of thing might actually have turned from a useful strength into a really unhelpful weakness?
Yeah.
And so it's the shadow of tangibility has really hit us. Um, and actually, I was just thinking about today's walk with Megan. She used the J word, which was joy, and the way
Yeah.
that joy has been sucked out of life because we insist on um, stripping it out. We insist on measuring everything. Can you explain what you're going to get from this conversation? Can you explain how this is going to be useful? It's like, well, actually, most joy comes from, mucking around with a mate and having a really good time. And sometimes something useful turns up, but there's always something useful, which is the sheer pleasure of the communication and connection with another person.
Yeah.
Um, and I think what we've touched into is people's hunger for emotional connection.
Yeah. Now that is really interesting. So is that what the article, it's behind a paywall, John. I couldn't get it in. So tell me about the article.
Well, the article, by the way, if you sign up as a member, you can get through
Oh, that's
three
good
free
news.
articles. That's
Right.
that's the way you get around the paywall.
Okay, right.
Um, the well, it does have a little acronym which I'm not going to spell out, but in terms of what's in the article, this is not about time management. This is about attention management.
Hmm.
More than anything, it's how we pay attention to the world. And without getting too esoteric, it's about how we pay attention to what we pay attention to.
Mhm.
And that is the sense of do not take it for granted. And again, this desperate desire for um, everything must fit within our current frame. Everything must fit within our current way of knowing. And we do have a little acronym, so I will run through it now. Why not? Um,
Mhm.
so it spells space, which isn't that fortuitous if you're going to write about
That
spaciousness.
was very lucky it came out like that, John.
Yeah, I
Uh,
mean, thank goodness the research revealed that and it wasn't a marketing gimmick. Um, so the S is for safety, and that is both the uh, emotional safety and the physical safety, that capacity to just feel it's okay. I can let go of how I thought I needed to be here. And so in this conversation, I mean, when I was, sort of most of my professional career, the idea of being interviewed without a strict script and knowing exactly what it was, good media training, what is it I want to tell Chris, rather than thinking, actually, I feel safe enough in this that I'm going to use this as an exercise for pushing my understanding. I'm going to,
Mhm.
make my loose threads visible because I know you, Chris. I know the sort of people are going to be drawn to this. So it is that's what the psychological safety means. And the
Yeah, yeah,
physical one is, yeah, no, I've made sure that I've had a nice cup of tea and I'm sitting comfortably. It matters. And part of my challenge in my life has been to take my body seriously. And again, within most of the corporate world and the work world, the body is an accidental byproduct. Um, and as I've become had more sustained brushes than I'd like with people with chronic illnesses,
yeah,
suddenly I've become increasingly skeptical of a world where we privilege the views of the young and healthy, particularly when we're in an aging population and a lot of people have got, quite chronic complaints.
yeah.
Um, so that's the S.
Mm,
The P is the people.
yeah,
Who do you choose to hang out with? Um, and sometimes it works well. And when you go and talk to new and different people, sometimes you gel and sometimes you don't. So it's not the smoothest thing in the world. I've had my ups and downs. But it's one of the reasons why I am addicted to doing the research because I just love the stories that people will tell you. And it's this idea of hearing the different stories, hearing the unpolished stories. Um, and it's once I've hardly come across anybody who doesn't, once you prompt them and give them conditions, doesn't have a compelling insight into their life and the world around them. And
yeah,
again, this is where my own pushback against the world of psychometrics and frameworks is the way that they disappear people's voices, disappear their identities. So that's the people. Um, the A is the attention, how we pay
yeah,
attention, what we pay attention to. And that if you don't do anything else, that's it. Um, so with the way that I'm trying to notice how you're attending to me here now, um, my anxiety about whether, should I be moving on or should I be sort of giving Chris the chance to say something, um, and and trusting that my attention is always telling me something. So when it's drifting away, rather than saying, "Oh, I should be paying attention," saying, "Oh, isn't that interesting? I lost focus there. What's that telling me?" I mean, there is the apocryphal story of, I think, someone who is mutually known to us, who was once running an action learning set and fell to sleep and was it sort of apparently gave the group feedback that, well, that's your fault for being so boring. I mean, I was just the embodied representation of the quality of your conversation. I'm thinking, yeah, that's bold. But again, how you are paying attention and how you notice your attention is always such rich data. The C is for conflict. And this is our old favorite, the Batesonian news of difference. And it is our relationship to it. And when you really hear something different, it jolts you. It does set your way of knowing the world on edge. And if we keep on thinking that, again, it's the desire for niceness and smoothness. But learning, understanding, and my thing have always been hiccups and sometimes more painful than that. I mean, I've had my own breakdowns over the years, and I know what that's like. And again, I think there's a brilliant paper by, I think it was the late David Casey, who
Oh,
talked about breaking the shell of our understanding. And this
yeah,
is again that real development. It's not a nice. If you want a 5-star, did you enjoy the learning experience? Was the coffee nice? That's not real development.
yeah,
And the trouble is, I think the world, by and large, is uncomfortable with what it takes to really encounter knowing the world differently. And that's why the conflict. And the E is then our dear friend, the environment, in terms of both the world around us and the macro context. That how, for me, I look at my daughter's generations, and I just think I would be very anxious. I'm about the ecological context. And
yeah,
then there is the very local environment that we sit in. Again, it's a referencing back to being, taking the body seriously, taking each other's bodies seriously. Um, and I'm just remembering one of the lovely stories in part of the research on the environment. Without, obviously, there's a huge amount of study in this. There's a guy I was interviewing over in Mumbai, and he says that every day, whenever he's feeling a bit stressed and whatever, so long as he can look out of his window and see a bit of green,
mm,
suddenly he feels better. So that for him, that the stimulation of nature, and then I'm just reminded of how we're completely confusing ourselves on what counts as environment. I had a conversation with somebody who mused about what does the impact of having green plants made out of plastic in pubs do to us? So this double game that I'm getting green and I know it's fake. And it's this idea of what does that do to our encounter with the world? Anyway,
yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, yeah. Just the other day, I saw somebody who actually sells a range of products for cleaning your artificial grass. And you think, didn't you get the artificial grass so you don't have to do your gardening? And now you've got a whole bunch of products so you can keep your artificial grass looking real. It's kind of,
It's the simulacrum of real.
yeah,
And it is, I mean, you get into it's the sort of the virtual world made physical, which is
yeah,
and it is this thing of not being able to deal with the messiness of life.
yeah,
I had an
mm,
argument with a friend who replaced his small patch of grass in London with something plastic because he didn't like the fact that the dogs peed on it and he didn't like the brownness. And I'm thinking, so you've got plastic instead? And he says, yeah, it looks nicer. And it's like,
mm,
that's, yeah,
yeah. Now, we could have a whole other podcast about this. So I want to go back to um, we were talking about addictions. We were
yeah,
talking about how there's so much appetite from people who work in all kinds of organizations for this work. Um, but I'm also thinking, gosh, and how does it fit in organizations which, whatever else they are constructed around, at least if they're a for-profit organization, they're generally constructed around making a product, maybe making plastic grass, raising capital to make plastic grass, publish quarterly returns for your shareholders. You have to make forecasts to market. Where does the space fit in? Are people looking for space in the right place?
Well, I have struggled enormously with this, and I every so often I go into a slough of despond where I think, basically we're screwed. and and then I was thinking, maybe not.
Oh,
I can't remember if I've said to you before, but I said to various places. One of the years ago, I worked for Dick Nolan and Dave Norton, who founded a little company, and Dave Norton was one of the founders of this thing called the Balanced Scorecard.
mm,
And this was back in the early 90s. And it turned, again, it got horribly abused. But its whole point was that financial performance is an outcome.
mm,
And so our fixation with, performance, financial performance, is basically, I think, technically called arse about what's it. Um,
mm,
and what they said was the underpinning thing, what enables all your good shareholder returns and all that sort of stuff. At the root, it's the quality of your learning.
mm,
And so this is where the learning organization, this is that Sengi and everybody have been on this for years. And we keep on thinking, oh yeah, of course, we can't deliver on these financial goals and all this sort of stuff unless we pay attention to the quality of our learning, the creativity of our engagement with the world, which we know that learning can't be just done by rote and that actually you've got to give people time to digest. But then we keep on saying, can we treat it, the same way that we do our financial reporting, please? And
mm,
that therefore kills exactly what's going to deliver performance in the long term. I mean, I did a brilliant interview. Well, the interview wasn't brilliant. The guy I interviewed was brilliant, who said that in his organization, in his business unit, he's fighting against a holding company who says we are we're a high performance organization. And he said that freezes people. That just locks people. It's the idea, come on, perform. It's like, oh,
mm,
blimey. If you've told me at the start of this, okay, John, this is going to be a 5-star whatever, and I'm looking for a ratings of this, and if we don't get at least 2.5 mega million views, quite frankly, John, you're a failure, and I will be never speaking to you again, might have induced a certain anxiety.
mm,
Whereas if his thing was to say, if I can get a high learning culture, and we all know that learning is trial and error. You don't know what you don't know till you stumble into it. We don't know what we're going to learn together from this conversation. And when you take learning seriously, you suddenly have to take a much more sophisticated way than the whole maximizing shareholder value, which is like, well, that
mm.
doesn't really help a conversation about what makes shareholder value possible. Again,
No.
it is the organic versus the mechanistic.
Yeah. And that comes back to where you were right at the start. I mean, you were talking in that conversation with Megan, about take just taking people seriously as humans. There was, and again, that's Megan's doctorate, isn't it? The Booba, I, thou conversations. It goes right back there. And in this series, we've also had, we've had Jeff Mead talking about his work on story and people using creative writing as a way of recreating their own personal narrative, a kind of a liberation creativity, as it were. Not his words, mine. Um, and I see these things coming together really. Well, in some ways they're coming together. In some ways, of course, they're coming together. They're the same thing. Um, and he talks about the difference between the machine world and the life world in coming from, I believe, Habermas, sociologist. And that's what I'm hearing here. And it's this life world. People know when it's real. We know when we're meeting as humans and we've got space and we know when we've been driven to destroy ourselves and to destroy everything else.
And it's
Yeah.
that we, if you think that we are life seeking,
Mm.
in a sense, if, from a commercial point of view, if you've created a life destroying context, you have a finite life, you are not going to exist that long. But in terms of the life world and the storytelling, I'm also part of the very fancy South Coast Autoethnography Network, which is, and I'm a
Who isn't? My word.
quite frankly, and it's just the most gorgeous encounter with people again looking to how do you integrate taking that first person story seriously, bringing all that rigorous self attention, and then connecting it into more established, a wider discipline, a contextual discipline. But it is this idea that unless you talk about your life in the first person, it's not a life. And again, if we're thinking about in workplaces, our fixation with labeling, you're whatever you are on your MBTI profile, you're whatever you are on your 9-box, grading thing. As soon as you're doing that, you're crushing, you're crushing, you're crushing.
Absolutely. I mean, and that exists in all kinds of. You were talking about frameworks there, but you pick up the average business journal, not your article, but you can pick up, talent. Are you talent? Or are you not talent? You, you pick it up and you've got I don't know, difficult people. How to lead difficult people. I mean, where are the people in the difficult people?
Yes. And again, it's the loca. I mean, this is where we get into to me, the flaw and what the unit of analysis here again is. It's you are a difficult person as a standalone object. And again, I'm a big fan. I don't know whether it's the sociologist Norbert Elias, or I always think of it was the guy, group psycho man, Fahad Dalal, who talks about, let's start from the notion of interdependent human beings, of which I is the singular and we is the plural. As soon as you let go of the idea that it's all about, you and me are completely separate in this, rather than thinking the unit of analysis is people in relationship. Oh my goodness. But doesn't that destroy agency? Well, what it does is it means that individual agency always exists in a context. And what it does therefore mean is that you step away from the obsession with ego and being consumed by it. And this is where I think when, the relational turn again has been talked about for decades, and certainly within the Ashridge world and before that in Carol Gilligan, seminal work. And this, it's so profound because to challenge the notion of the sovereign individual is really to take a large hack at, a couple of 100 years worth of philosophic thinking. But it is the most liberating experience I've ever had in my life, which is to realize, yes, I have an experience, and my experience is completely wrapped up in my relationships with others. And in my professional work, I just love it when I am in an intense encounter with another. That's why I always co-write. I never write on my own I never research on my own, because I just know that when I'm with another, it transforms the quality of my understanding and my presence.
So, I mean, we could talk about this for ages, but I want to continue talking about it, but I also want to talk about it by understanding a bit about where it comes from. I mean, how do you come to be doing this work? What's the roots of it for you?
A lot of it anchors around years in Jungian analysis, which happened when I had a
what does that even mean?
So work of Carl Jung, spin-off from Freud. And again, this was very traditional, lying on a couch, started off once a week, went up to 4 times a week. So I popped down to my psychoanalyst, and it was really about finding ways to integrate my relationship to my past, to my present. One of the liberating frames that I find from the Jungian school is the notion of the morning and afternoon of life. And the idea is up until your early 30s, by and large, you live with the choices other people made for you, or by what chance happen to throw your way. I think the philosophical phrase of you're thrown into the world and you're just making your way. But the idea is that by the time you get to that early 30s phase, you've got enough experience to have a sense of when have I been at my most alive?
Mm.
And so for me, that was, I disowned huge elements. I've always loved the qualitative research. I've always loved getting into intense emotional and intellectual connection with others. But somehow that struck me as naughty because I was, it was something to do with the point of all my schooling and
Mm.
my consulting work was all about pretending to be, you know, independent, being a
Mhm.
neutral observer. So
Mm.
rather than being a participant in life. So for me, that afternoon of life is when you exercise meaningful choice because you've got enough
Oh.
experience behind you. And in my case, I then got myself resourced enough, which was to encounter different philosophical traditions. And it was
Mhm.
when you began to get in flow, which was this notion of stopping trying to be something that really didn't fit well with me.
Mm.
Um, and that's part a lot of it. And my own personal struggle was to make my peace with my own upbringing. I was
Mm.
one of those people who went away to a boarding school at the age of
Right.
7. Um, so this would be why I'm drawn to emotional hunger as a theme,
Mm.
is I'm not convinced that that is a healthy thing for a human being to go through.
Mhm.
I grew up in a military family again, so it framed a particular thing. Um, and it's, the past is always present with you. I mean, I remember when I was, used to teach on a leadership program when I went over to the business school side of Ashridge. I used to say you've got two choices when it comes to your past. You can either be informed by it or consumed. Um,
Mm.
and but there again, it was to stay with how your past is playing out and how your past isn't as you'd like it to be. And I went through a bit of, the woe is me, misery me type of stage of life until rather a robust colleague got really bored of it and said, "You go on telling yourself that story if you bloody want to." And I was like, "Oh,"
Yeah.
and that then opened me up to the experience that of how much of our narrative mind, how much of the story we tell ourselves is in our choice. And here
Yeah.
again, we're into that difference between reaction and response. And this is again with the spaciousness stuff, is all about we have a huge degree of freedom in our response,
Yeah.
maybe not in our reaction. Um, and I have
Yeah.
another, one of the guys I work with a lot called Mark Cole,
Oh.
he's got a new book coming out at the end of this year where he's applying a lot of the existential philosophers
Mm.
to, again, organizational life. And to me, spaciousness is all wrapped up about this
Mm.
because it's all about owning your responsibility for making your personal choices, not under conditions of your own choosing, and understanding that you're making those choices in relationship with others, not as a sovereign individual, in context where there are certain, I mean, the phrase is facticity, but you could use there is a reality you cannot deny,
Yeah.
but you can choose your relationship to it. And that's a brutal philosophy. I mean, it really is. I mean, what was it? Viktor Frankl, you could have a good day in Auschwitz. There were good days and bad days. And you're just thinking, even under that extreme condition, you have a human capacity to choose. I mean,
Mm.
that's it's much easier to say, actually, I'm too busy to think about it. Or can you tell me what my MBTI profile is, please? Rather than say, I am an active agent creating my life right here, right now, and every choice I make, every word I use.
Mm. Yeah. So this was 1990 something, you said.
97, 98 was when I started going into analysis. Yes.
Yeah, 98. So fill in the gap a bit between there and the front cover of the Sloan Journal. There's a quarter of a century that I just want to know a bit about. So how did the work unfold over that time?
Well, um, I met some, I had some really gorgeous corporate experiences. It was a lovely German company. So I encountered the best of people, and I think
Yeah.
that gave me a sense of optimism. I'm speaking I can't name the client name,
Yeah.
but they, I mispriced a piece of work for them, and horrendously. And but I've been told that when doing business in this way, handshake deal, and I said, look, I shook my hand on this. It's my fault. And then about halfway through, the two chief clients sat me down in a room and said, look, you're going to run out of budget in around about a week. And we do not want you forever fixating about how you're going to get your backside kicked for completely losing the business school a whole load of money. And I said, well, a little bit more. They eventually beat me up to doubling my budget because their thing was, we want you to do a really good piece of work.
Oh,
And that was lovely. And it was this knowledge that actually that was a lovely thing. And I also, sometime around then, had an encounter with my then boss in Ashridge, who took me out after I'd been there a year. And he said, could you stop being a B grade version of what everybody else is, please, and be an A grade version of what you are? And it was like, oh, blimey. Um,
wow. And are you able to say who that is? Because
that
that's a powerful,
that was a guy
profound.
guy called
Yeah.
Alex Knight, and he said it
Yeah.
beautifully in a
Yeah.
way I could hear, and it was the most
Yeah.
liberating
Yeah.
encounter I'd ever had. And again, it was this experience with generative people who had some sort of power relationship with me. And this was a
Right.
really good encounter with it. It wasn't competitive. It was a sense of mutuality. This was, of somebody saying, this is good for you, and it's good for me, and it's good for us. And it was lovely. Anyway, I did that for about 5 years, and got involved with the Masters in Organizational Change. Um, and then I hit a moment. What my analysts worked out was when my eldest daughter hit the same age that I went away to boarding school was, I just
Oh,
suddenly had to leave the business school world.
right.
I just had enough, and I went and became a full-time dad, a
I
stay-at-home dad.
remember now. This is the point at which I first remember you. I remember you leaving, and then I remember you coming back into writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what sort of year was this then?
So it was 2002, and
Ah.
I'd lost my sense of faith with what was going on in the business school, and what I didn't I'd lost a sense that this had any purpose. I was just asking people to sweat themselves harder, faster, stronger.
Right.
And then 2004, I was basically goofing around by then, doing the childcare stuff. Um, and I got sent a draft of some research by George Binney, who was doing the Living Leadership, the original research into
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I'd got on with George beforehand, and he knew that I was a loose end. Uh, and it was the first bit of, organizational research which took people seriously, because it was all about people moving into taking on senior roles, particularly at board
Yes.
level roles. And it wasn't a question of, do you want to take this particular job? Obviously, you must. It was working from the principle that people saying, what impact will me taking this job have on my relationship with my significant other, with my kids?
Yeah.
And it was this thing, at last, it was leadership and organizational life being looked at in the context of people's lives in the whole. And so that opened my eyes to, this was a really nice piece of work. And then I thought, I'd like to have a go at doing some of this writing
Mm.
research malarkey. And at that particular time, Bill Critchley was nominally meant to be stepping down, and he'd said he was never going to write down what was covered in the Masters at the time.
No.
But as he was thinking he might be retiring, he said, "Okay, right, if you'll come alongside, I've got some budget. We'll pay for you to do some research." And so we researched alongside the participants and the faculty
Mm.
in that. And that just snowballed over the next, between 2006 and 2013. I worked with him and with Kathleen King
Mm.
and with so many of the faculty and so many of the students in both the master's and the doctoral program. And it was a gorgeous way for me to keep my intellectual horizons expanding, expanding, expanding. And it just, I became the chronicler of
Yes.
both of them,
Yeah.
and that was lovely. And at one stage, I remember working closely with, and again, I'll name him because I'm happy, and he'll be happy for me to do, a guy called Alper Utku. Um, and he was struggling with his getting his doctoral thesis done, and
Mm,
Kathleen cleared with me to sort of just be a sort of a sounding board for him.
mm,
And what became clear was he is a very successful entrepreneur, works in the
mm,
business world and all that sort of stuff. But he was trying to marry his Sufi practice with
yes.
being a business leader.
Mm,
And his struggle was he kept on saying, I can't bring my Sufi practice into this.
yeah.
His anxiety was it would be a bit like the Tao of leadership. He didn't want to commercialize it and instrumentalize it because the Sufi tradition, as you know better than I do, is a poetic one. It's
Mm,
very much about the intangibility of knowing. And we found a way, and he found his voice, and we've been very close friends since. So that took us up to 2000. And then at one stage, in parallel to that, as the kids got older, I got back into working, joined the leadership program. I became a tutor on that at Ashridge. Um, and there I met Megan Rates.
mm.
And quite frankly, we were a pair of Tiggers. Uh, she's an enthusiast junkie. I'm an enthusiast junkie. And we just, you know what it's like when you just
Yeah.
come across and we
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
bounce.
What was that? That was the one where you and I and Michael and Megan were briefly the faculty on something.
That was it came about a year after that. It
That
was
was a year after, was it? Yeah. Oh,
it was and that was a program that was ahead of its time.
yeah.
And again, it was
Mm,
trying to bring the on purposeness. And so that part of the spaciousness ties in there because if
mm,
you have not got a sense of it is the way that I am living my life and we are living our lives on purpose, whatever that means to us, then therefore that's what gives tasks meaning. But she found it hard. I think we all found it hard to concretize it.
yeah. Well, I only got a chance to be on one because I had left Ashridge um, uh, by the time the next one came around. So
Yes.
I was GameShift by then. Yes.
Uh,
Or I
yeah.
was walking the coast path, which is another of these. And there's the story of my very long walk, which was my spaciousness to between Ashridge and uh, yeah, between Ashridge and GameShift came 100 days of silence.
Well, this is now. I'm now thinking. I must approach you because we've just been talking to an agent over in the States. So we're hoping somebody's going to be asking us to write a book on spaciousness. And I'm just
Uh,
thinking, I need to interview you from the space through the space thing about that walk. Again, in
yeah,
terms of the environment, again, why that environment was so important to you.
yeah. Well, so the bonus episode of Series One is called "The Salt Path," and it's a reflection of Philip and me reflecting on the film, which I was hugely reluctant to watch because the book, although a million people like bought the book and loved the book, it wasn't my walk. It was a really different walk. Um, and somebody's cutting the grass outside. It's because I haven't got plastic grass, John. Um, and the uh, and I so I've made a podcast about it, but I would be delighted to because it was a pivotal 100 days of my life because I couldn't go from what I was holding, which was a huge sense of trauma, and I completely lost my faith in the work I did and in humanity. And I just walked into the wilderness because I literally walked away from every town I came to. I couldn't. I even went round in loops because I couldn't walk into towns. I just couldn't be with people for a while. So I should be very happy to to talk more about that, but not on this podcast. But you can if you. I can see you want to ask something.
No, but what you brought out, and this is the discovery. I've made my peace with the two parts of my personality or identity, which is one, I love the empathetic connection and closeness you
Mm,
get with people, and I have some part of me which is a cold fish.
mm,
If I'm being negative, I describe it as a vampire, which is, when I hear about the pain of others, it's like, oh, excellent. It's like, as you're talking about, 100 days in the wilderness. This is, Jesus only
mm,
took 40. Um,
yeah.
and
Uh,
so it
I
is,
did. I didn't have the connections. It was slower for me.
but it was that it's to do this type of research is you've got to combine, I've got this perverse quality where I love to be both deeply attached and to have moments of non-attachment. And it's the duality. And so, the opportunity to get close to your experience
We
without being consumed by it would be lovely.
no, we can definitely do that. John, I'm conscious that we're on 40 minutes and we shouldn't go much beyond 45. I want to know about so where next? I mean, you've mentioned a book, but I'm sure there's the yeah, where next?
Well, I can't remember if I've done the plug. We've got a working title, which we came
No, you
up with.
haven't. You haven't done the plug. Please plug the book that you haven't even got yet.
Yes, so this is the conversation with the agent over in New York around about 2 hours ago. And it's going to be called, well, the working title which we're pitching is Permission to Pause, Finding Spaciousness in a Pathologically Busy World of Work. And that is my own thing, which is how to make it a compelling invitation. And you've identified, and we've already talked about earlier, about how difficult it is to make the invitation not to be busy. Um, so where next? It's very much a a way of landing this in the world, which,
Mm,
and I know I've got a priggish side. So there's something about making it invitational, not making it ideological, and it is trusting to the desire for liveliness and joy in people,
mhm,
and trusting that there are enough people out there. And it's I've my ambition is to manage to make a living with my inquiry process that I do with Megan, which just I found that it's uplifting to take part in it. It's not, and I think it's pretty confident to say it's uplifting for everybody who takes part in it. And it's a classic example of to inquire is to change.
yes.
And it is a very simple process. So we go into a group of 6 people for 2 hours. Megan will do a structured pause, and she does it beautifully, and she does it very lightly without saying, right, we're going to do a meditation, and anybody who doesn't buy into meditation is wrong and weak. She does it in this beautiful way, which is, this is going to land well for some of you. And for those of you who doesn't, just, do what you need to do for the next thing. And it's to trust that around a broad theme, let's say, how do we deal with pathological businesses in our world? You trust that if you invite 6 people to volunteer, and it can't be more than 6, this is one of the things that I'm absolutely addicted to now, they will have a really good conversation about that. Megan and I will join in because this is the participant. We're not sitting there as, in our white
Mm,
coats. And then the extra spin on it as a process is around about 80 minutes in, is we'll go, okay, most people at that point have been talking about experiences out there in the world, be it in their workplace or in their wider lives. You then say, how has pathological busyness, for example, been playing out in the conversation that we've all just been having for the last 80 minutes? So you bring the reflection back in. So it's
yeah.
giving people a practical experience of what paying attention to how they're paying attention means in the moment.
Mm,
And the 2 hours is important because I'll always say we will finish 5 to 10 minutes early, I promise. There will be no homework. So it's slightly different from the action learning thing, because so we're not adding to anything. And it's very rare that people have been given an untask focused invitation to just pay attention to themselves.
Yeah. Mm.
And the other thing that, again, we develop by accident is right at the start, we say, and it's okay if you don't want to say anything at a particular point. So to
Mm.
you break the curse of the turn taking. And the
Yeah.
other thing is a bit of process that has really made a big difference is we don't do the round of death right at the start by saying, tell me about yourself, Chris. I don't know why I have to do a comedy bad accent there, but it's just that fake
Yeah.
bonhomie.
Yeah.
We'll say, everything that people need to know about you will emerge as you talk about the theme. So if
Mhm.
I started, and I'd join if I said, why what's my experience of pathological busyness? It's bloody timesheets. And it's the
Mm.
way that did, and that ties back to my school, where every minute of every day you were being graded on a mark scheme,
Mm.
and how that's wired into my being. That tells you an awful lot about with me without me saying, "Hi, I'm John. I've done a research thing," and
Yeah. Yeah.
it's how you invite people to lead with their stories.
Mm.
Um, and I would love to. I think that's the most powerful change vehicle and
Yeah.
change intervention you could do as in an
Yeah.
organization.
And I've seen you hold groups really beautifully in other contexts, where you come and you talked about your own other other work with groups, and I know you do it delightfully. So I would could use this as the second part of the advertorial to say, be more like John, hire John, because there is, yeah. John, is there anything I haven't let you say? Is there anything I've stopped you saying?
I'm going to embarrass myself now. It's just all about love,
Hmm,
and it's having a loving orientation. And that's if I'm looking at where I'm going with my life now, it's to embrace that loving orientation. And you've noticed I've shut my eyes because I'm embarrassed to have said that.
isn't it interesting, but very beautiful. And it connects beautifully to Helena Clayton's podcast, which was all about love. And of course, it was woven through Helen Schroeder's
Oh, I loved that.
podcast.
Oh, that was a
Yeah.
gorgeous
Uh,
podcast.
and it reminds me of on Amok, my first cut of my master's dissertation. I thought I did discovered love in consulting. I was writing brilliantly about it, and Hugh Pigeon said, "Well," she said, "you could read Roger Harrison from 1970 something." I said, "It's all been done before, you know."
But
um,
the important thing not to lose, because I mean, every so
yeah,
often I lose. I mean, when particularly on the
yeah,
spaciousness stuff, people will say this has
mm,
all been done before, and in a way it has, and we're drawing on stuff, but it's bringing it alive in the context right now,
now, yeah,
and
yeah.
that's what's so important about it.
Which you and Megan are doing, and which I think Helena Clayton is doing, and I think um, I would recommend you have a listen. And
Oh,
anybody who's into this has a listen to the Helena one, um, and several other, because it's such an important theme to me. I think if work is done without love, you can feel the difference immediately. Yeah, John, we
can I
could
just?
probably,
I'm going to
yeah.
just as to say to just if you've got a minute, what stood out for you for this conversation?
Um, well, actually, several things. I mean, the first thing was you've interviewed me from time to time, which uh, hasn't generally happened. Only Philippa Holdman, you know, um, comes on here as a guest and then interviews me. Uh, so that's a difference. I think the fact that this will be the only time I suspect in the series where we have half of quite such a zeitgeisty publishing duo as you and Megan. At the moment you're on the front cover of the Sloan, talking about not about the article, but about the process and the work behind the article and why it matters to you and the place of love in that. Um, you know, and it hasn't felt like there's been a particular agenda because I know for a fact neither of us had one. We we've had a conversation, and I think that stood out. And as far as possible, this series is like that. They're just conversations with people I've known for a long time, and who I admire very much, and who I think the world should know about their work. And you're one of those, John. And so I just need to say a quick word to close off the podcast. And I'll come back to say one more thank you to you for being here, if I may. So slightly longer than normal, but well worth it, I think, folks. So that's the brings us to the end of this episode of About Time. Loads of connections to other episodes. I'll probably put some of the connections I can see in the show notes. Look forward to the next one. Thank you for listening to this one. And John Higgins, thank you so much for being a friend and for being here sharing all this stuff with us. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.